This is regarding Honky Tonk Man. From Jeff Sousa in Boston. Yesterday on the show, you talked about the situation where Honky Tonk Man refused to drop the Intercontinental title to Randy Savage. Oh, my God, Ted DiBiase's here. This actually has to do with Ted DiBiase's career. Ted, how you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing really good, Ted. You're on the air with myself and also with Brian Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly. And I was actually in the middle of reading an email about one of the times, yesterday we were talking about your career, and it's sort of like I kind of never thought about this before, and you probably actually did, that you came very close to being the only person ever to hold the NWA, the WWF, and the UWF World Heavyweight Championship during your career, and actually you sort of held the WWF title for about a week, but you never really won it.
Right.
And the other ones you actually never got, but you were scheduled at certain points to get. It's very strange.
Yeah, I'm like somebody did an article on me, some guy down in Australia about, the guy that was supposed to be champion but never quite got it,
But I mean, you were like right there. I mean, like I remember with the UWF title. I mean, you went to Japan. You were going to come back and get it, and then the company was sold.
Right. When I came back from Japan, of course, when I left for Japan, I had basically told them that, look, guys, I've been kind of back on the back burner for a while, and I understand that. That's the way things, guys rotate and everything. I said, but look, I've got such a good deal in Japan, either do something with me or I'll just go to Japan. And that's what they were going to do, was put that title on me, and then the company was sold by the time I got back. But at the same time, Bruce Pritchard had gone to New York and applied for a job and had contacted me and said, don't sign anything with anybody until you talk to Vince McMahon because they want you. And so I had basically, I kind of sat around and I had a conversation with Jimmy Crockett and had made a verbal agreement with him tentatively. And I said, but before I sign any contracts, I'm going to, search out all my options, and I kind of waited around for the phone to ring, and it didn't ring for a little while, and I was like, golly, well, maybe they forgot about me, and I was about to just go ahead and go with Crockett, and that call came, and I went to New York, and the rest is history.
That was probably, in hindsight, probably the biggest decision of your career, wasn't it?
Oh, without a doubt. The guy that I have gone to consistently, kind of as a mentor in this business, regardless if I have made up my mind, and I had pretty much made up my mind anyway, but I always run everything by Terry Funk. And a lot of people listen and I go, Terry Funk? People look at Terry and say, well, the guy's like, he's crazy, he's nuts, he's still in the business. Let me tell you something. Terry Funk predicted everything I've seen happen in the business back when I was in college in the 70s. I mean, he told me when I was a college student in, 1974 or 5, that wrestling was going to come to a point where there would be one or two big promotions that guys would start traveling worldwide and would go on, road trips and tours just like, like rock stars. And all of that has I've seen to live and see it happen.
You mentioned that, and that just makes me remember a couple of things. Is that I didn't know him as long as you did, but when I first met Terry Funk, and this is early '80s, this is before McMahon went, he told me the same thing.
Yeah.
Exactly what was going to happen.
Yeah.
The other thing he told me that was, and this is also early '80s, was always watch Japan, because what happens in that country as far as the style of wrestling will predate what happens in the United States. So if you pay attention to how the guys are working in Japan, a few years you're going to be ahead of the curve in the United States. And that was always pretty good advice because, the style with the near falls and all that, a lot of that was, kind of, popularized in Japan and then came here. A lot of the smaller guys getting over started in Japan and also came here many, many years later, like 15 years later.
Right. But then it got to, gosh, I don't know. I guess I've legitimately, I'm 46 years old, so I guess I can consider myself an old timer now. And but and I sound like one too, because when you watch what's on television today, I mean, oh my gosh, there's no rhyme or reason to anything anymore. It seems there's no storyline. There's no, I mean, and if there is a storyline, it's not in the match. It's backstage, and you don't have, to me, in my mind, there's a few, but there's not as many or nearly as many as there should be. The caliber of wrestling workers today as there was, even 10 years ago. And certainly not 20.
It's different demands.
It's a different demand, and maybe it is supply and demand, but as I watch what I'm watching today, it's like as the match takes place, unless it's a Chris Jericho or a Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, some of those guys, a Bret Hart, who can go out there and work that style and work a fast-paced match and still tell a story. There is no story. It's just it's like a series of it's one maneuver to the next maneuver to the next maneuver, and they don't mean anything. I mean, it's like it's like a guy takes 15 suplexes and he gets dropped on his head from the top rope to the floor, and then he bounces right back up, shooting back in the ring, and then somebody beats him with a small package. I mean, I don't understand.
You know what I thought was always interesting is the last couple of days they had at the King of the Ring, they spent the whole show trying to build a storyline with Rikishi injuring the shoulder. In fact, he even had this giant bruise on his right shoulder. But every comeback he made, and then the next night on television as well, was punching with his right hand.
Yeah.
And not like punching and then selling like,
right.
Obviously you know how to do it because you probably did it as good as anyone. How to yeah. work an injury and,
right.
and that whole thing. I mean, there was none of that.
No. And there is none of that today. And I don't know. I'm really so disassociated here anymore with the business. I couldn't really tell you what's going on. Just a little bit that I do glimpse. But to me, again, I grew up in the business. I love the business. I love the guys. I'll always have a heart for the business, but it's just not. It's not the business that I grew up in. And I know everything evolves to a certain point, but today, McMahon was the first. I mean, the same guy that took wrestling out of the, blue-collar crowd type atmosphere and made it mainstream, dressed it up, cleaned it up, pointed it towards families and kids, now has gone, over the edge, and it's, let's exploit women, let's exploit sex, let's exploit just about everything we can in the name of the almighty buck. And I'm very much against it. I mean, you can talk about how great the ratings are, and you can talk about just how many people are watching. Well, that bothers me. It bothers me when our society is one that is enthralled with, that type of entertainment, and Howard Stern and Jerry Springer and all this other tabloid television. It's like, where are we going? And I guess a lot of that may be due with the direction my life has taken, but I just, put it this way. When I can't let my kids turn it on and watch it, and people say, well, and McMahon would say, well, we're not trying to appeal to the younger audience today. I don't think it's suitable viewing for adults, to be honest with you. It's too much over the edge. I mean, when you got an 80-year-old woman and you have her take her top off, you can call it an accident. You can call it anything you want to. Nothing on that show.
I prefer not to remember that scene.
Yeah, nothing happens by accident. I beg your pardon. And then one night I flipped on there and I saw Pat Patterson drop his pants, had this great big stain on the backside of his shorts, and rub it in some guy's face. That's about as, vulgar. I don't know,
Well, I just want to tell you that you were very lucky you did not see King of the Ring last Sunday.
Yeah, probably, yeah. Well,
because, you probably, I know you wrestled Pat Patterson in New York, and obviously you came across the Briscoes many, many times in your career.
Yeah.
And Jerry Briscoe and Pat Patterson had what was it, an evening gown match? They were wearing, a drag queen match where they were wearing women's clothing, and the object was to rip the clothing off of each other, and it had to be the worst match of both of their careers, wouldn't you say? I mean, Patterson could have never had a match that bad. I mean, no. Oh boy. I don't want to think about that one either. Your career actually goes back. Your stepfather was a wrestler, in fact, a great amateur wrestler and a great professional wrestler that a lot of fans today probably don't know about. But Mike Dibiase had, I guess, legendary wars with Terry Funk's father in Amarillo.
Absolutely.
And your mother was also a professional wrestler. So when you were growing up, I mean, in many ways that's like similar to someone like an Eddie Guerrero or the Funks.
Right.
I mean, was it in your mind, were you going to be a professional wrestler, or did that come later in life?
It came later. I mean, I don't know. Actually, I had my father was pretty adamant about the fact that I wouldn't be. And the irony of that is that, you know, here I am, 46, and he died at the age of 45. And as a 46-year-old father of 3 boys, I know exactly what he meant. I mean, and I'm not talking about just the nature of the wrestling business and what it's become today, but even in the days when I loved the business and everything, it's the lifestyle that goes along with it that is why a parent and a father would say, guys, do something else, because, you know, the odds of your making it, you know, big, you know, I was a very fortunate person. I was one of the very fortunate few, you know, that you know, was at the right place at the right time and got the breaks and was able to, you know, be in town. It's just like Hollywood, you know, for every guy that you see and every woman that you see become a major star, you know, on the silver screen, there are hundreds who are equally as talented who never get the break. And that's the way the wrestling business is. And then aside from that, you know, you live in a world where you're constantly on the road. And it's, you know, it's kind of like a make-believe world because, you know, everybody likes you, everybody knows you, everybody's trying to be your buddy, and it's, you know, it's an ego trip. And, you know, everything else. I mean, how many guys, Dave, in the business have died in the last 5 or 6 years due to alcohol and drug-related incidents, you know, whether they were accidental or intentional? You know, there's been several. And, you know, it seems like it never stops, you know, and as a dad, I'm going, golly, you know, guys, there's got to be a better way. You know, do I love the business? Yes. And would I have changed what I did? No. I would have changed some of the things I did, but I loved it. But I was one of the fortunate few, and I was also one of the fortunate few that came along when wrestling took off and became mainstream, and wrestlers began to make, you know, more than average money and more than just above average money, but great money. And but even today with the great money that a lot of guys are making, there are no benefits. You know, you have your own benefits. So there's just a lot of drawbacks to it. And you know, my mom and dad, neither one of them really wanted me to do it. My dad died in the ring. He was 45 years old, had a heart attack. But I'd always had it in the back of my mind. I always loved it. And it was like either football or wrestling. You know, I got a scholarship to play college football. I initially signed with the University of Arizona and then ended up going to West Texas State, largely due to the influence of Terry Funk. And largely because I wasn't sure. I didn't want to put all my eggs in one basket. You know, maybe it'll be wrestling, not football. And wrestling went out. And what happened was I went to wrestle the summer between my junior and senior year of college just to make some good money and see if I liked it. Well, I should have never done that because I never looked back, and I just kept going.
You still talk to Terry Funk?
I'm sorry?
You still talk to Terry Funk?
Yeah, I still talk to Terry. I mean, not on a real regular basis, but a matter of fact, I talked to Terry about a week. As a matter of fact, I was in Texas, and I talked to Terry about a week before he showed back up on WCW, and he had told me adamantly that he was retiring. And I just laughed, and I said, Terry, I said, you've made a career out of retiring.
Since his first retirement, there are very few people active in this business that were active when he first retired.
You're right.
I mean, I don't know what. I think that he may have, and you may have been around, because, okay, I seem to remember Amarillo territory. I mean, his first famous retirement was 1983 in Japan.
Right.
But I seem to remember watching Amarillo television, which for a very brief period of time was on here in the Bay Area, and you were just on your way out of there to go to WWF for the first time,
right.
the North American champion.
Right.
And I seem to remember them talking about, like Terry was not on the scene at the time. I don't know if he was, doing a movie or what, but I remember like they would always refer on television to Terry Funk. It's like, oh, Terry may come out of retirement soon. Kind of like the guy may come back. I mean, this is when Murdoch and Mulligan were apparently running things.
Yeah.
So he may have actually done a retirement like in the late 70s.
Yeah.
So, what going through, that was like a big decision for you. Your career up until that point, the $1 Million Man, so it's up through 87. You were largely this clean-cut, Jack Briscoe-like babyface technical wrestler, great
right.
performer in the ring.
Right.
And then you went up there and you went and you became, what would have been like for you, and even 100% gimmick. I mean, still keeping the good wrestling aspect of it once the bell rang. But was there any? I mean, when they presented you with $1 Million Man idea, I mean, did you think it was going to hit as big as it did? Because they certainly from day one went with it like it was going to be a huge thing.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I know I can remember. Pat Patterson saying to me that he knew that this particular idea, the character of the $1 Million Man, was the idea solely of Vince McMahon. It was his baby. It was his concept, and that's very easy to believe because what he created in me in a character,
it was him.
He has become in reality. But,
it was him. I remember when you started doing the gimmick. When you started doing the gimmick, I knew it was going to get a push because it was like Vince is having you being just about the best in-ring performer. Play him.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what Pat had said. He says if Vince could put the tights on and climb in the ring, this is the character he would be. And so I knew that it was going to get a big push. And I always had faith in my ring skills and what I could do in the ring. And I knew that I was and I loved to be in a heel, and that was the deal. I mean, they knew my talent when they brought me up there. They knew what I could do. They knew that I could interview and carry myself. So I felt fairly confident. But no, I never had any idea that it would take off and run as long as it did, and stay as, I don't know how to explain this, but even today, of all the characters that came in and out of there and that have been created, it's just one that everybody remembers. I mean, I'm surprised today, Dave, when I go and I have young kid, junior high kids today who, I haven't been in the ring for 6, 7 years, 8 years maybe, and they know who I am. And I go, well, you remember me as a manager? He says, oh no, we've seen you, and we watch all the tapes, and we know the $1 Million Man. It's like a character that, and overseas, I get a lot of email from overseas, from Germany and England and the European countries, of fans who remember that character. So I don't know. I guess I was just a lucky guy.
And Vince used to give you cash to hand out on the road, too, right, to live the gimmick?
I'm sorry?
Didn't Vince used to give you cash to hand out, like when you went to bars, just buy beer for?
Oh yeah, it was like the biggest fantasy in the world. I mean, Vince says we're gonna market you, and the way we're gonna market you is we're gonna use you to market you. In other words, instead of you're gonna be a walking advertisement of your character. You're gonna ride in first class everywhere you go, and every time you climb off a plane, and people see you come to or from an airport, it's going to be out of a limousine, and you're going to stay at the finest hotels. I mean, I lived the gimmick, and yeah, they gave me a pocket full of cash and said, get the gimmick over. I mean, walk into a restaurant and say, hey, I'm the $1 Million Man. I'm picking up the tab. Throw down the cash, walk out the door. People will talk. And they did. And I said, Vince, what do I do when I run out of money? Come back and get some more. It was nuts.
Let's go to Dave in Connecticut. Dave, you're first up with Ted DiBiase.
Hey, Ted, how you doing?
Pretty good, man. How are you?
Good. First, years ago, I don't know if this is real. I was actually at a sports memorabilia show, and I saw somebody who claimed to be your limo driver sell some of your memorabilia, like the jackets you wore.
Uh-huh.
They're going for like $5,000.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that's amazing because I haven't sold any of mine.
Well, there you go. There's your answer.
That means like somebody is marketing and selling my stuff, but it's not authentic. Because every jacket I ever wore is hanging in my closet.
It was right after the 1992 Survivor Series, and I remember he was selling the Big Boss. He claimed it was the Big Boss Man's nightstick they used in that nightstick match for $5,000.
Anyone could get a nightstick and say that one.
There you go.
Yeah.
I was wondering. I never saw there was kind of a dream match that was going on at house shows, but it was never televised, as far as I know, between you and Ricky Steamboat. Were those house show matches any good? Because that sounds like a dream match to me. Yeah,
I enjoyed working with Ricky very much. I wish that I'd have had more time, because, we worked a few matches, but we never worked like a major program, where we went out and would have had the time, I never had the opportunity to do 30, 40-minute matches, with Steamboat, and I would have loved to have done that. Of course, that's a thing of the past anyway.
Hey, does the name Chris Curtis ring a bell?
No.
All right, if I'm remembering, one of my favorite angles that they brought to introduce you, there was a match between some guy you called Mr. Washington and Chris Curtis, and you said you were a main event wrestler, so you wouldn't wrestle any scrubs. So you hired, Mr. Washington to wrestle for you, and you gave him, do you remember this? You gave him, a couple $1,000. And then the guy you paid $1,000 to wrestle the jobber lost, and then you ended up beating the jobber up and taking the money back.
Yeah, well, I have no idea who. I did so many things like that, and obviously neither one of those guys were guys that I worked with, worked programs with or worked with on a regular basis. So, I can't say that I do remember that.
What was it like? How close did you get with Andre the Giant?
I got very close to Andre. Andre and I got to be very good friends. My relationship with Andre goes all the way back to college. When Andre was coming through, he always worked for the WWF. Vince McMahon Sr. was basically his boss, and then Vince Jr. took it over. And he traveled around much like the NWA champion. He would go from territory to territory, and he was a special attraction. And when he came in through Texas, and I was a college student, I would go to the shows, and I would take Andre out after the shows and take him to the bar. Here I was a college kid, I had no money, right? And so, Andre would, I said, well, boss, I'll take you out, but and he says, don't worry about it. You don't worry about everything. You just take me and I'll take care of the rest. And he would literally, I remember the expression on these girls' faces in these bars where he'd ask them to take a trash can and clean it out and fill it with beer and ice and bring it to the table. And
were you ever on Lifestyles of the
We're talking about a great big trash can. And they would do it, and we'd sit there and I spent a lot of time with Andre Pickled back in those days because you didn't hang with Andre and not drink. But what a lot of people don't understand about Andre is that in his later years, he was in pain most of the time. He had a very bad back. He'd had surgery right after WrestleMania 3, the big match between him and Hogan. And there's times, if you look at some of the old tapes and you see Andre and I as a tag team and walk into the ring with me, he's got his hand on my shoulder almost every time we walk to the ring. And it just looks like he's got his hand on my shoulder, but he had his hand on my shoulder to help steady him.
Yeah, his
back was that bad.
Did he used to walk around, or did he used to be in a wheelchair at the airport? That's what I heard.
At the very end.
At the very end, yeah.
At the very end, yeah. At the very end, if you recall, I think the last time he was ever on an American television, which was an anniversary show on TBS, and he came in and I guess they had a party with Bill Watson, Dusty Rhodes, and Andre, and I forget who else was there, but I think Andre was either I think Andre was already in a wheelchair by then. If not, he was, he had, 2 canes. But he was in real rough shape by the end.
Yeah.
I remember there was a Survivor Series where he was, like, booked as the captain of a team against the Warriors team. I was still, like a kid. I was, like, 12 years old. But I just remember being so mad because it's like Andre got eliminated. That was back before I paid attention to work rate. Like Andre got eliminated like before the match started. Like I guess he couldn't even like wrestle like 2 minutes at that point. Like I remember when he teamed up with Haku, like the only thing he did was the elbow, and Haku would wrestle like the entire match.
Yeah, Haku did about 90% of the match by then. They used him as a tag team to kind of keep him.
That brings me to another question. I remember Andre was advertised for the 91 Royal Rumble. What was the deal with that? Was he supposed to win?
I don't even remember 90. I don't even remember 90. Which was the Royal Rumble? Was that the one that? It
was like they had the Ultimate Warrior against Slaughter as the main event.
Okay, so that's Miami. I remember that. I don't remember the match specifically. As far as that was that when Hogan won? Hogan won in Orlando.
Ted, you were in that match against Dusty Rhodes. It was I think it was Dusty Rhodes' last WWF match.
Well, I can't. Golly, I can't remember.
Virgil turned on you.
They all run together after a while for me.
How does it feel? You sort of actually talked about this earlier. Wrestling is something that I guess was in your blood. In that you followed it your whole life, and then and you were working with WCW until just I don't know, what was it, about a year and a half ago or so?
About a year ago, yeah.
About a year ago. And now you pretty much made a break. Although I guess you appeared on some of those WXO shows. How does it feel that something that was so big a part of your life is something that you really don't like right now, or at least aspects of it that you really don't like right now?
Yeah, well, it's sad. It really is. Something that was. It was a part of my life since I was 4 years old because I grew up in it, and a lot of relationships, a lot of friendships, that are. I won't say that a lot of the friendships have been severed. It's just that, I'm not there anymore. It's kind of like, in the wrestling business, guys, some guys stay in touch, and there's a couple of guys that I, try to stay in touch with, but for the most part, I just don't have common ground with too many of the guys anymore, especially the guys that are still active in the business, simply because of the direction my life has taken. To go from the wrestling business to full-time ministry, to be ordained into the ministry, to be an ordained minister, which is what I am today. That's a big jump. It's a huge jump. And it's a long story. And the long story goes all the way back to probably 92, right after WrestleMania 8, which was when IRS and I were tag team champions for the WWF, and I think that was in Indianapolis, Indiana. But I called home the next day and was confronted by my wife on a number of issues because I was living a lifestyle just like everybody else. Wine, women, and song. Let's have a good time. The next town, the next girl, the next party. And, I had a wonderful wife and a wonderful family, and I had been a real jerk, bottom line. Got caught up in being a star, got caught up in making the big money and living the $1 million man. And, realized that I had jeopardized all the things that were truly important to me to feed my ego, and that was a wake-up call. Now, as far as my relationship with God, that goes all the way back to my childhood. I took a relationship with God very seriously as a child, and that relationship carried me through my father's death and my mother's subsequent alcoholism and a lot of things early on in my life, and basically carried me and gave me the strength and the drive to become the athlete that I eventually became and go on to college and then on to into the wrestling business. But I just separated myself. I just the deeper I got into the business, the further away I drifted. And not the business per se, okay? Don't misunderstand that. Not the wrestling business, but the lifestyle. Is everybody in wrestling like that? No, not everybody. Matter of fact, Mike Rotunda, who was my tag team partner, is probably one of the greatest family guys I ever known. But I was, I don't know. I fell to those things, and subsequently. I turned back to God, and came clean with my wife, and much to the displeasure of all the guys, not one guy said, "Oh, Ted, you know, you just got to come clean and start from there." All of them said, "Lie." They said, "Don't tell the truth. They don't want to know." But I did come clean, and it was probably a 2-year process getting back to coming full circle. But and I can say today, without a shadow of a doubt, that due to my turning back to God, and in particular my relationship with Jesus Christ, that I have a closer friendship and a more intimate relationship with my wife today than I ever had before. And not only my wife, but my children. And that's the other thing, is that as I look back from here, I realized that, gosh, had I not stopped, physically stopped wrestling when I turned 40, which was 6 years ago, how much more of my kids growing up would I have missed? And man, they only grow up one time, and I missed some of it, but I, by the grace of God, I didn't miss it all. And there's going to be a lot of guys, a lot of guys are going to look back on some of the, some of those times and say, gosh, I wish I'd had them. Like that song, "Cats in the Cradle."
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I tell you what, man. But I got my oldest son back when he was 13. My oldest is by a previous marriage. And then I have 2 sons, Teddy and Brett, who are, one is 17, one is 12. The oldest will be 23 in September. And I have them all. They're still under the roof, and we're all very close. But it's a huge jump. And, again, I don't want to sound like, and gosh, I'm sure I'm coming across like that. I don't want to sound like one of those, I'm not bitter at the business at all. I love the wrestling business. I will be forever grateful for the time of my life that I spent in the business. I loved to entertain people. I loved what I did. I was successful at it. I was given I'll always be grateful to Vince for the unbelievable gimmick he gave me, but for all the reasons that I'm happy and love the business, today I'm sad because of the direction it's taken. There would have been a time, Dave, if I could have told people, you know what, wrestling, holds 7 of the top 10 spots in cable television viewing, and holds the top 3. I'd have been proud of that. Professional wrestling beat the National Football League in Monday Night Football in ratings last year. I would have been excited about it, but I'm not. And I'm not excited about it because of the nature of the business, because of the product and what it's become. When you get on these big sponsors, and for every big sponsor that dumped them, one of them here locally, WorldCom, just dumped them, and it goes right back to the dang thing. It's a morality issue as far as I'm concerned. It's like, okay, it's like, well, what saddens me is the same guy that gave me this big break. I have lived to see him break every principle that he said he ever stood for. And that's what's sad for me. It's that it's like, well, there is some truth in what Vince says, though. Vince says, you know what? I'm just giving the people what they want. My ratings are higher than they've ever been. Well, there's some truth in that. And what's that say about our society today? What's it say about what we're going and where, what entertains us? What's next? Are we going to be like, hey, the movie Gladiator was just out. Is that what we're going back to? We're going to start feeding the Christians to the lions in the Colosseums, eventually? I don't know. But I know this. In my mind, and from where I stand today, somebody's got to draw a line in the sand at some point and say, that's enough. It may cost me some money, it may cost me some ratings, but I'm going to take the moral responsibility to do what's right and not just do what's popular. And the thing is that we're all, as I grew up in the business, I can't tell you how many times I heard Terry Funk say this to me. You have to educate the people. In other words, you educate them. It's by what you tell them on TV. and how you can educate them in a direction. And we're being educated in that direction, you know. And for all the vulgarity that's in wrestling today, I still believe, hey, you know what? Disney World is still one of the most popular places to go in the country, and the Disney movies are still, you know, big box office. You know, I believe there's been a market that's been left behind. I believe that, you know, the two companies are fighting so hard to, you know, to win the ratings war that, you know, it's kind of like. My opinion is that Vince has cornered the market on the smut, so just let him have it. You know, just take WCW and go totally the other direction, and just, you know, program your program towards the families and those people out there, because there's a bunch of them. You know, WXO died, and the only reason I was part of WXO was because when they asked me to come on board, and all I was there, Dave, was a figurehead. They wanted me to be basically the on-air Vince McMahon. And my first question was, tell me what your programming is going to be, because if it's like what I'm seeing on TV today, I don't want to have anything to do with it. And they said, no, that's what we want to do, is we want to bring a wholesome program back on the air. You would not believe the incredible feedback that we got in those 3 or 4 weeks. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that what happened was that one of the major backers bailed out on them. You know, I never did know. You know, nobody ever called me and said, well, this is what happened, Ted. It was just kind of like I knew that something had come up, and there was a major toy company that was a player, and they backed out. And I don't know if it was because they already had a contract with one of the other companies, and they didn't want to have two, or what it was, but that's why it died. It didn't die because of lack of interest. There was a lot of interest. We went to NAPTI, and I can't tell you how many people came through there and said, man, you know, if this thing goes, we want it. But it just didn't go.
Let's go to Chad in North Carolina. Chad, you're next up with Ted.
Hey, guys, how's it going?
Real good.
Ted, when you look back on your career, what would you say are your biggest highlights?
Oh, man. Well, without a doubt, you know, becoming $1 million man in the World Wrestling Federation, as far as, you know, worldwide exposure and, you know, being on top, that was it. And I guess one of the biggest nights would have been, you know, as far as the character is concerned, you know, not a match night for me, but just a night that will always stick out in my mind, is the night that actually that Andre wrestled Hogan at Market Square Arena, because you know, that's when I had made the brazen statement that I didn't need to win the belt, that I would buy it, you know, and that Andre would beat Hogan, and they did the gimmick with the twin referees, and it was the first time that wrestling was on network television since the 50s, and I was a part of that main event, and that was really that night kicked the $1 Million Man into gear. That was the takeoff night. And that was the night that Andre, you know, ripped off Hogan and took the belt and wrapped it around my waist. And, you know, that was the lead into WrestleMania 4. That was a major highlight.
That's still the most watched wrestling match ever in the United States.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah. It was watched by 33 million people, which is much, much more than 80s matches now.
How about that?
Yeah, I mean, because it did a 15.2 rating. You know, one thing, I remember watching that show live on NBC it was in prime time, and what were your feelings in the ring where Andre, you know, I guess it wasn't a big deal, but I couldn't stop laughing when Andre said, you know, he was supposed to hand you the world belt, and he says, I'm giving you the world tag team title.
Uh-huh.
You know, just, I don't know, it's one of those things. Now, you were supposed to win the tournament at WrestleMania.
Yeah.
How far in advance did they come up to you? Like, was it a month in advance, or how long before they said, Ted, there's been a change of plan, Savage is getting it?
It was a lot closer than that.
Really?
I can't remember how long, but it wasn't too far out. And to be honest with you, the whole it's almost like the result of them not giving me the WWF belt was the cause for creation of the $1 million belt. It's kind of like, well, we'll pacify you. Well, you're the $1 million man, and why should this belt mean anything to you? When you can make your own type of thing. And I knew what they were doing. I never played the political game. Maybe I should have. I just was not. I wasn't calling Vince McMahon every week, and I wasn't in his ear every day, and I didn't play that game. And I don't know. I still don't know. Maybe you know. Maybe you know better than I do. Why they chose to put the belt on Savage. Savage wasn't happy about something. I don't know.
The honky tonk man thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
And is it true you were booked to win the NWA World Title?
I'm sorry?
Is it true you were booked to win the NWA World Title?
Yeah, I was supposed to win that one too. and it was what it was then was it was going to be kind of a round robin deal where the concept, if I remember it right, was that they weren't going to leave the belt on one person for so long, and they were going to kind of try to move the belt around between Dusty Rhodes, Rick.
Hello?
Yeah, Ric Flair and myself. And I don't know. When I went to Atlanta in 81, I was told to go there to get the exposure on the Atlanta television because I was in line for the belt. And then, of course, it never happened. I was there for a while, and although I was doing great, I was doing very good. I was getting over very strong in the St. Louis market. St. Louis, as you know, Dave, was kind of like a territory, a one-town territory. And if you did well in St. Louis and got great exposure and got over, you were recognized by just all the promoters in the country knew about you. And this was still back when the concept of being one territory worldwide was just in its infancy. But I had my first big main event in St. Louis with Harley Race to sell out the Kiel Auditorium. And I believe that was in 80. I don't know what that was.
That might have been in the late 70s.
No.
I'm not sure exactly.
I think it was it was 80, 81.
Yeah.
It was right around the same time.
How's your neck doing?
I'm okay. I had the surgery a year ago. I had 2 discs removed from my neck and replaced with a piece of bone from my hip, and for all practical purposes, I'm okay. Technically speaking, a lot of doctors told me that I could have had that surgery 7 years ago and gone back in the ring, and the odds were in my favor that I'd be okay, but I wasn't going to take any chances.
So was that pretty much the reason that you ended your career, or was it?
Yeah, it was a combination of things. I was starting to feel the road. I had gone through that ordeal recently. It was just 2 years prior to that I'd gone through the trial with my wife at home, and it was the realization that I needed to spend more time with my family, that I'd been on the road a long time, that I was about to turn 40 years old, and I was, it was forever in my mind that my father had died in the ring when he was 45 years old, and that's one promise I made myself. I said, I am not going to stay in too long, and I really thought that I would end about 45, but because this came up when it did and the other circumstances surrounding it, I said, no, this is it. It's time to go. I can stay in the business. I can stay, I can manage, I can commentate, I can do something, but I don't have to be in the ring anymore.
Here's the question. We got an easy one, I think, this time. In the late 1970s, Ted DiBiase held a WWF championship. It was not the $1 million belt. It's a different one. What was the name of the title, and what was the name that that title later became? So anyway, for those of you who are fans of WWF late 70s, you'll probably remember this one instantaneously. Before we get back to the calls, I want to ask you, with WCW Saturday Night, you're probably not aware of this, but the final episode of the show was actually last Saturday. The show has been, I guess, moved to Saturday morning, canceled, however you want to call it. And when the thing was first getting on the cable, late 70s, early 80s, that was the period you went down there. We were talking about, and I think one of the most famous angles. And I was just wondering, like, years later, people who are older fans bring this up to me all the time, and we even talked about it on the show not too many days ago. Was the angle that you did with the original angle you did with the Freebirds with the pile drivers?
Right. I remember very well. Matter of fact, that was that angle was done right before I met my wife. Gosh, I came to Atlanta, and Ole Anderson had been the booker, and Atlanta had a great run and had kind of died off. The TV was hot though, and so I come in, and I'm being told that, they're going to groom me for possibly to be one of the next champions, and everything's looking good. The next thing I know, Ole Anderson is gone, and Robert Fuller is hired by Jim Barnett as the booker. Well, look, I got nothing against Robert Fuller. He was a good worker. He comes from a wrestling family. But as a booker, he wasn't too hot. And, I had come from Bill Watts. I had been with the best, who was groomed by Eddie Graham. And, and I saw things that were just terrible. And I also saw what he was trying to do. He was told what to do with me, but that's not what he was doing. He was told to feature me, and what he did was he tagged himself up with me.
Right, you and him were the big tag team.
And basically, that's the way it went. He didn't really, he wasn't going to totally feature me. So if he, to appease Jim, he put me with him in this tag team. And I remember, oh gosh, that great big
Frazier.
Oh Lord,
Stan Frazier.
Yeah, it was hideous. It was absolutely hideous. I mean, some of those things were the most embarrassing things I've ever done on television. And then Buck Robley came in. And Buck Robley came in, and I was familiar with Buck, and had worked with Buck, and Buck had worked for and had booked for Bill before. And that basically was Buck's idea. It was a way to get something going, to get some excitement going, and to breathe some life back into me, because they had basically, killed me off, just by association. And so we did the angle with the Freebirds where I get dropped on my head a number of times on TV, the pile driver, and then actually taken to an Atlanta hospital. I spent a week, an entire week in Atlanta hospital.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God. That's
the good old days.
Yeah. Spent a whole week there, and that's pretty good, because there wasn't a thing wrong with me. We worked the angle, actually.
You worked the hospital?
Worked the hospital, yeah.
Oh, my.
And it was funny, too, because, they complaining of a neck pain. So they were taking me to a neck, physical therapy every day. And of course, I'm complaining of pain, and I said, I hit the button, and every 4 hours, bring me the Demerol. If I'm going to stay in the hospital for a week, I'm going to enjoy it. So, I was pretty much.
At least you didn't find anything wrong.
But I stayed in there for a week and had all kinds of...
What if they found something wrong?
Huh?
What if they would have found something wrong?
Well, I don't know.
I mean, you're a wrestler as far as, if you examine any wrestler close enough, you're going to find something wrong sooner or later.
Find something somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But,
I have a question for you. I remember you did all those angles as a $1 Million Man. You'd, offer this little kid, $100 if he'd dribble a basketball 10 times and kick it out on the ninth one or whatever. And I assume that most of those were plants or whatever, maybe all of them, but did you ever get a real little kid and screw him out of the money?
No, all of the TV ones, all of the ones that were broadcast on television were prearranged, and the people were pre-picked. Now, the ones that were fun were the ones that were in the live shows, and this was at the very beginning of the gimmick and the angle. As I would go to, my first 2 or 3 times around, especially the big markets, basically every night, you know, every night I would have a match and then grab the microphone and say, I got $300 here for somebody. You know, if you'll, you know, push this peanut hull across the ring with your nose, or, you know, I think the best one, the one I enjoyed the most was in Boston, the Boston Garden. I said, I got $300 here for somebody. If you will, I said, Virgil, take off my boot. So he unlaces my boot and takes off my boot and my sock. I said, if you'll come in this ring and kiss my stinking sweaty feet. And I couldn't believe, you know, the number of people. And this really, really gorgeous girl had her hand up, and I said, this will make him really hate me. So I picked her. You know, she comes climbing in the ring and starts. I said, no. You can't just walk across the ring to the $1 Million Man on your knees. And she gets on her knees and crawls across the ring and kisses my feet. It was wild. But I mean, $300 a night right off the top.
And everybody was wanting to do it.
Oh gosh, yeah, it was amazing.
Well, Brian, do you remember when they had Tiger Ali Singh try to copy his gimmick, which wasn't all that?
Same deal.
The exact same gimmick, and he got really far doing it too, but it's another story.
You got what?
Oh, Tiger Ali Singh did your exact gimmick, and it was like, I mean, he did it for about 8 weeks, and he's never been heard from since. But,
often imitated, but never duplicated, right?
Yeah, I mean, everybody just saw it as like, oh my God, you know, we all saw this gimmick. But anyway, there was a guy.
Not Ted Dibiase in the ring either.
Yeah, that's the other thing. That's right. He wasn't Ted Dibiase when the bell rang.
Yeah.
There was a guy. I mean, he was a high school kid. I'll never forget this. Because it was probably, I think they said he was like 15, 16 years old, right?
Uh-huh.
And like Tiger Ali Singh told him, you know, to pick a booger out of his nose and eat it. Okay?
Yeah.
So, and you know, for $500 or whatever the money was, he did it. And I was just thinking, this poor kid is going to have to go through high school and never have a date. You know, because it's like, you know, he's on Raw. Everyone finds out what's going on Raw when it's someone in your school. And it's like, imagine having to spend 3 years in high school, you know, with all those, you know, with that reputation. Oh.
And wasn't that one of them they did that they never aired?
The one that I just mentioned, they definitely aired that one because I actually I think that I actually no, this was a different one. There was another one where they did it with someone who was like a reader, and I was like going like, oh, you know, I didn't know the guy, but I sort of did, and it was like, oh my God, he's going to be humiliated everywhere he goes for the next 6 months because he went on and did whatever that humiliating thing was.
I heard a little bit about this, but I mean, what did they call this guy?
Tiger Ali Singh, right? They acted like, you know, his father, and I guess, you know, Tiger Singh, you remember him from Japan. You know, so it was his son, and they wanted to bring him in as this rich, guy for, you know, like the Indian market and all this. I mean, they gave him a big push with your gimmick, you know, as this rich playboy.
Right. And
every wrestler hated him. His work was terrible, and I think he's in Puerto Rico or got a bad knee, but I mean, he didn't make it. There's some, I was going to bring up, do you know, I don't know why this popped into my head other than Duggan wrestled Monday night on Nitro for the first time in a while, and then they featured him and everything, and when I saw that, one of the things that popped into my head since you were going to be a guest on the show is that, how am I going to phrase this without being too mean to Duggan? I always thought Jim Duggan was a great worker when I used to watch him wrestle you night after night after night, and then years later, when he stopped wrestling you night after night after night, all of a sudden, was it Jim Duggan was it a different Jim Duggan?
Oh no, it was the same Jim Duggan.
Yeah, and somebody actually emailed and mentioned a match, and I remember this match from Houston, Texas. It was like a tuxedo street fight, coal miner's glove, steel cage match for Paul Bosch. That you put Jim Duggan over like nobody has ever put anyone over that I've ever seen, probably. Almost. I mean, it was incredible.
Well, I tell you, that was I'll never forget that match. We did that match all over that territory. That was the gimmick match of all gimmick matches. I mean,
it's like 8 gimmicks in one.
Yeah, 8 in one. It was incredible. Yeah. It was dressed in tuxedos, inside a steel cage, coal miner's glove on top of a 10-foot pole, loser leave town.
So I mean, you were tearing clothes. You were taking, you know, all of these bumps, and then finally the big bump at the end for the coal miner's glove.
Yeah.
There was I was going to ask you something because you brought up, with your wife and everything like that. What was the timing? You were wrestling actively in the WWF, and very few people leave the WWF voluntarily. Usually it's injury or it's or they're just not wanted anymore. And you left voluntarily to work in Japan full time, which actually, as it turned out, didn't last very long. But I guess that probably wasn't. Was that all during that period where you wanted to spend more time at home, or what was the reasons for wanting to go back to Japan at that point in your career?
Well, it was a couple of things, Dave. My personal life, and that happened in '92. And which was WrestleMania 8, and the territory at the time, things were not great in the WWF. There was a lot of bickering, and there was a lot of people that weren't happy, and of course, but that wasn't, that's the business. Business gets good and business gets bad, but the biggest reason was my personal life, and I didn't make that real vocal. I didn't tell everybody, but I realized that I needed to get out of that environment because it was very hard for me to stay in that environment, and it's kind of like taking a recovering alcoholic. Where do you put him? Back in a bar? No, you don't. You don't put him back in a bar. You move him out of there. Keep him away from there. But the main thing was I needed more time at home. And that's the one thing about Vince and Vince's ego is that, as long as you're doing things Vince's way, you're okay with Vince. But if it ain't Vince's idea, forget it. Just forget it. And it was not Vince's idea that I leave when I left. And then to make it even worse at that time, I made a statement to somebody, kind of like, gosh, I finally made it out of here. And what that was it was a sigh of relief, and it was relief because of the grind. I mean, what the grind is like, and I don't know what it's like now, but I know what it was like then. I mean, it's like, oh my gosh, at times 3 weeks on the road, without a day off.
The travel when you were there was much harder than it is now.
Oh yeah, and it's just incredible.
Yeah, people don't realize the idea of literally 22 straight days with double shots on weekends and no days off.
Yeah, and it was just incredible, and it was that was what it was. It was like I'm finally there's going to be some relief, and there's going to be some it's not going to be this grind. That's all I meant. Well, that got back to Vince, and it was kind of like he took it like, well, finally I got out of this stupid place type of thing. And I don't know, he made an off the cuff remark to me, at what is it, SummerSlam in SummerSlam '93 was that? Yeah, Razor Ramon. I wrestled Ramon Scott Hall. That was my last match with the WWF as a wrestler. And then 2 months later, or a month later, I went to Japan, and my intention was to go back to Japan and go back on that routine where when I was there, I'd be there for a month, and when I'd be home for a month. There'd be so many weeks a year, and when I was home for, not a day and not 4 days or not 5 days, but, for weeks, and quality time. And that's what my intentions were. And then 2 tours into that, I left WWF in August, and by November I had hurt my neck, and that was it. I got out of the ring, and I had a couple of months off there, and I think I went to Los Angeles in January to kind of get back in shape, and I got a call from Bruce Pritchard, and Bruce said, how would you like to come and co-host, I think it was the Royal Rumble in Providence, Rhode Island with Vince? And I said, sure. So I went and did that, and I said, hey, look, if you like this, I can come back to work and, be a manager, commentator. If I'm the $1 Million Man, I create the big stable, build me a stable of wrestlers, and we'll go that way. And that's what they ended up doing. That's how I ended up back in the company. And that was just not even a year later. Well, it was like the Royal Rumble, I think, in February, and then I made an appearance at the next WrestleMania, which was 10 in New York.
I want to also make mention that the trivia question, the first two correct winners were Joe Dennis of Moncton, New Brunswick, and Jerry Moore of Honolulu, Hawaii. The title that Ted DiBiase was held in the WWF in the 70s was the North American title, which later became the Intercontinental title. So, got all the business out of the way. Let's go to Adam in New Jersey. Adam, you're up with Ted DiBiase.
First of all, what's up with the mullet, Dave? Second of all, Ted.
Yes.
Those are old pictures, guys.
Sure, whatever.
They are actually. But anyway.
What is it?
Brian, you just harassed me,
That is your job. Ted, I have to admit, back in the day, I absolutely loathed you because, you beat up my man Macho Man. But I was wondering, if I remember correctly...
You should have loved him because, seriously, those were Macho Man's best matches in the company.
Well, you got to remember, I was 8 years old, so I didn't really understand the business. I'm just why is he beating on the guy who talks weird? But, what is it? If I remember correctly, your last time in the WWF was 96, early 96, 95, all that with the Steve Austin thing. Now, why did you leave then? I know the Click thing was huge then, and I'm not sure exactly if they had anything to do with it, but just a question. I'm going to hang up because I've been on hold for an hour or so.
I left the WWF the last time largely due to just, again, I had gone back there and been a commentator and a manager. My requirements of being around basically was one day a week I would go to the studio and do voiceovers, and once every 3 weeks I would show up and do the televisions, and that was it. And what they were trying to do was very slowly, I think, move me into being a road agent, and I did not want to be a road agent. And basically, I think it was Bruce Pritchard came to me one day and said, "Ted, what do you think about being an agent?" And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, Bruce," I said, "when you tell me how many days a week or a month I'm going to work, and when you start paying your road agents like you do your company employees, make me a company employee with all the benefits and put me on a salary, pay for my hotels and my rent-a-cars, I'll be an agent." That was the last time I heard of it.
Now you got it right about the time you got the WCW offer as well, right?
Yeah, and the reason that I really anguished at the time over it because at that time the WWF had not gone down the road that they've taken, and they had been very good to me. And but it was a business decision. I knew I could go to the other company and that I could make more money and work less and have all those benefits, be an employee of the company, and that was never going to happen working for Vince. It was what Vince wanted me to do. And basically, they put me out on the road with who was it? Sid. And I felt like that's the way they were leading me, and that's not the way I wanted to go. And so I went ahead and made the move.
What were your thoughts? It kind of all happened right in front of your eyes. The NWO thing happened with WCW, which was at least in part your idea, and also it got really. I mean, by the standards, it upped the raunch factor of wrestling, and you were right there, kind of like with. You kind of had your beliefs, and then you were on TV, and it was, you were already preaching by then, weren't you?
Yeah, well, I finally went to Eric because, when I was brought in there, I was brought in believing that I was going to come in and I was going to be basically the same character, only couldn't call me the $1 Million Man, but it was basically the same image, the rich guy with the money that's backing this whole deal. And but we were the bad guys that were going to come in and run roughshod over this company, and eventually that the WCW and the good guys would rise up and beat us. But what happened was
that never did happen, by the way.
No, it never did happen. It still hasn't happened. And what they did is they began to glorify and make the NWO cool. It's like, and I went to Eric and I said, "Look, Eric," I said, "let me tell you," I said. And along the way, Eric decided to jump himself, and he became he saw where it was going, and he jumped right in the middle of it. And so I went to Eric and I said, look, I said, here for the last few weeks, since you have become the spokesperson, so to speak, you have basically taken my slot. And I said, that's okay, it's working, that's great. I said, but all I'm doing is walking out to the ring and standing in the corner and holding Hogan's belt. I said, I did not put 20 years of my career, of my life into wrestling to end my career being Hulk Hogan's belt bearer. And I said, that's nothing against Hulk either. I said, that's just, not me. I said, you can get some other stooge to do that. I said, the point is, the more I walk out there and I stand there and I'm not heard from, the less I mean. I said, so I would rather just sit at home. And he said, you've got a very good point. And I said, not to mention the fact that, I have a book coming out. My book is about my life. It's about my Christianity. I've been on the 700 Club, and I said it's kind of like everybody knows the business is a work, but, the two guys in the main event don't walk in the building holding hands, so, it kills the mystique. I said, so you might think about that as well. Well, that's when they said, well, just go home and we'll think about it. And then the next call I got was to bring me back. And again, there's a tremendous lack of respect on the part of that company. I don't want to just say Eric Bischoff, but, him as well. No respect. Because for somebody that's been in the business as long as I've been in the business and at the top, for him to call me or I get a call, not even from him, but it's like, be in Detroit, okay. So I show up in Detroit and they tell me, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put you with the Steiner brothers. Well, I didn't think it was really a smart idea. I didn't really like it, but it was there. They'd already planned it. And I realized how unorganized they are anyway. So I said, well, what am I going to do? Griping about it's not going to change it. So I went ahead and went with it. But the whole point was that I didn't get a phone call. We didn't discuss this at any length. Hey, what do you think? It was like, well, this is what we're going to do. And I didn't like that. And I was kind of sour from that point forward, and as time went on, they began to realize that it made no sense me being with the Steiner brothers as well. It's like, here's two guys, pretty good wrestlers, okay, they're not great interviewers, but I tell you what, have become much better interviewers now than they ever were. At least Scott has. Anyway, it didn't work. So they said, okay, when Scott got hurt, they said, well, go home and we'll let you know. Well, I went home and stayed home all summer, and then when I came back, all I came back to do was, they had me doing NASCAR and just a little bit of something here and a little bit of something there, and it was, I realized then it was pretty much over.
Let's go to John. John, you're next up.
Hey, guys, how you doing?
Pretty good.
Real good.
First off, I just want to say to Mr. Dibiase, I'm a huge fan. For as long as I can remember watching you. And before I get to my question, I just want to tell you how much I admire you and respect you for your stand in your Christian faith. Just being you being so willing to share with others, I think it's just a great thing. Anyway, my question was, you mentioned earlier about working with Ricky Steamboat. I was wondering, who were some of the other guys during your WWF run that you really enjoyed working with, namely the ones you got to work a long program with? I remember your matches with Randy Savage being really well. And anybody else you really enjoyed working with in the ring?
Oh, yeah, well, I enjoyed working with Randy. But I tell you who I really enjoyed working with the most, and Jake the Snake. And I'll tell you why, because it was a night off for me. When I worked with Jake, I didn't have to worry about anything. I didn't have to lead anybody around by the nose and tell them what to do every move. And I could almost work a match with Jake, and not even talk. Jake was that good, and that's a shame. It's a shame that Jake has ended up the way he has, and my heart goes out to him. The guy's got a lot of problems. But I'm telling you, as far as talent goes in our business, there has never, there's not too many equal. tremendously talented in the ring and tremendous psychology of the business, as well as very creative mind. So it was always a pleasure to work with Jake. I had a pretty good run with the Big Boss Man as well. But if you want to go back as far as people that I loved working with, let's go back in my career and, hey, Dory Funk Jr., Terry Funk, Harley Race, Jack and Jerry Briscoe. Those are some of the guys that I worked with that taught me what I know, and one that really had a good time working with, but didn't have that many opportunities, was Bret Hart. A matter of fact, I can remember the first time that Bret and I worked. We worked a 20-minute match in Odessa, Texas. It was like a match that they were doing for Coliseum Video. And Pat Patterson said, just go 20 minutes, and just end with like kind of a standoff, outside the ring, no winner. So we did the match, and we came back, and Pat was just, going nuts. He said, that was phenomenal. I says, gosh, you guys have been working together a long time, huh? We looked at each other and looked at him and said, Pat, that's the first match we ever had. And what that was just two guys that came from the same school that went out in the ring and had that same feel and respect and knowledge of the ring and the business. And we just went and had a match.
Do you have like one favorite? I mean, this is a tough question, being all the matches you've seen. Do you have a favorite match you've ever seen and a favorite match you've ever been in?
Wow. I don't know that I could pick a favorite match that I've ever, the most favorite match that I've ever been in. There have been too many that I really liked. But as far as matches that I watched, and it'd be hard to pick one, but Dory Funk Jr. and Jack Briscoe had, in my opinion, some of the most classic wrestling matches, hour-long wrestling matches where it was a contest, and they made it a contest, and they went, and they battled, and it was never boring, and it kept you in suspense. Some of the greatest technical matches that I've ever seen were between those two guys. Tremendous.
About a year ago, I actually watched a tape of a 60-minute match that those two had in Japan, and what was real interesting is they did a 60-minute match, and at no point did either of them ever come close to playing to the crowd.
Yeah.
I mean, it was that their eyes were on each other. Their eyes were never on the crowd. They were never. The crowd reacted to what they did based on what they did, but they did not they didn't cheerlead. They didn't do. I mean,
exactly.
They didn't do anything that I would even call work. I mean, it was amazing watching because they weren't working the crowd. They were working.
Yeah.
Basically, they were working a shoot, except it wasn't a shoot.
See, and exactly, and that's the way that I was taught the business at the beginning. But the only thing is, the only time you can work that way is when you have some. Again, when I worked with Bret, that's the way I worked. You can't work that way with somebody who doesn't know how. Or if you have got to, it's just like when I started working with Junkyard Dog, as talented as JYD was, his talent was his charisma, his ability to communicate with the people and do interviews. He was not tremendously talented in the ring. And I can remember Terry Funk telling me, he said, Ted, he says, you've got to work around him. And basically, it's like he's standing in the middle of the ring, and you got to bounce off of him and make the match exciting around him. And that's what I did with him, and that's what I did with a number of people. I won't name any names.
There was go ahead, Brian.
I was just wondering who trained you.
I'm sorry.
Okay,
who trained you?
Who originally trained you?
Who originally trained me? Well, I can't give any one person credit, but there's a list of guys that had a lot to do with it. But Dick Murdoch, tremendous talent. Carl Cox, Terry Funk and Dory Funk Jr. Harley Race had a great deal to do with it. And Bill Watts. Overall, I worked for Bill more years than anybody before going to the WWF. And again, he was tutored by one of the best, Eddie Graham.
Before we go, I want the story you actually told me. you were almost typecast as a babyface, certainly in the early portion of your career.
Right.
And your big heel run, which was really, something that I guess you were almost the most unlikely heel, but yet it was probably one of the most, up until before the WWF, probably the biggest program you ever had was when you turned on JYD.
Exactly. And that all happened. As a matter of fact, guys like Paul Orndorff were moving to the WWF. Paul had gone, and I think the Samoans had gone back up there, and Ernie Ladd was booking for Bill Watts, and Ernie came to me and he said, Ted, he says, you and JYD are our baby faces. It's kind of like salt and pepper, and but we need a real good heel. And you got to be looking around. Got to be looking around for a good heel, and be thinking. So I said, okay, we'll do that. So I got to thinking about it. And I remember I had teased JYD and said to him, I said, you know what, man? I said, I'm going out there and I'm busting my rear end every night. I'm working 30 minutes and 40 minutes. I said, you're shaking your backside, dancing to the ring to that music, howling when you hit the ring. You work 5 minutes, the match is over, and you're making all the money. And he was like one of my best friends. And he just laughed, boy. And so it just dawned on me. Just one night, riding down the road, I said, who would ever believe? I mean, I grew up in this territory. They knew me from rookie on up, and I'd leave and come back, and I was still that sweet, good guy. And I said, who would ever believe that I would turn on the dog? And I went to Ernie Ladd's hotel room in Shreveport, knocked on the door, and I said, Ernie, I found your heel. And he said, who? And I said, you're looking at him. And his eyes got as big as saucers. He just said, oh, my gosh. Oh, my gosh. And he sat down. He says, He says, And I said, I know. And he says, I said, nobody would ever think it. And I said, you're right. And that's how.
Ted, we're like totally out of time.
Okay.
I want to thank you very much. This was a great show. I really enjoyed this one. And I want to remind everyone, Brian, I want to thank you as well. And we will be back here tomorrow.